Okay, good morning and good afternoon, everyone, depending on what time zone that you're in. I'm Nisha Patel. I'm the Executive Director of the U.S. Partnership on Mobility from Poverty, based here at the Urban Institute. And joining me are Larry Katz and Ai-jen Poo, members of our partnership, and I will introduce them, say a little bit more about them in a minute, but I just want to remind Larry and Ai-jen to mute yourself until I cue you for your presentation, and that'll keep the line a little bit crisper for everyone. So I think we've got super excited to have, I think, over 250 people registered for this webinar from all around the country. And this webinar is part of a series of webinars that we're doing that's in conjunction with the release of a number of strategies and ideas that the partnership has developed, all in response to one big, bold question that we were presented with, which is, what would it take to dramatically increase mobility from poverty? And so, as I mentioned, I'm thrilled that we've got people from communities all around the country joining us. And I always like to take a look at our registration list, and I want to do a special shout out today to Goodwill affiliates across the U.S. because you have the record for the most participants in the most communities joining us. So we're thrilled that you're with us. And we have with us two of the most fabulous speakers imaginable, the dynamic duo of Larry Katz and Ai-jen Poo. And again, I'll say more about them in a minute. And after we hear from both of them, we plan to leave some time for questions and answers. So be thinking of questions, jot them down, and you can send them using the chat function throughout the webinar, and we'll try to get to as many live as possible. And I'll remind you after the presentations again how to do that, but you can send questions throughout. And after the webinar, you can also tweet us your thoughts and reactions. You can see all of our Twitter handles there on your screen, and we'd like to encourage you to use the hashtag #MobilityFromPoverty. Okay, so a little bit about the people who are involved in the partnership. If you joined us for our last webinar, or you've been with us on some of our design labs or site visits, you know that the partnership is chaired by David Elwood at the Harvard Kennedy School, and it is comprised of 24 members who come from incredibly diverse fields and perspectives. Majority are people of color, and that we have people from different sectors and very different political points of view. We have economists, including Larry Katz. We have psychologists, sociologists, people who are running programs on the ground, policy experts. We have 5 MacArthur geniuses, including Ai-jen Poo. And really importantly, I want to say up front that we're not a consensus group. So not every partner necessarily supports every individual idea proposal that we're going to be releasing between now and early April. And so you see the members of our partnership on the screen. I think you'll see a lot of names that you recognize and maybe some that are new. And many of you will already know our speakers, but in case you don't, a little bit about them. So Ai-jen Poo is the director of the National Domestic Workers Alliance, and she's also co-director of Caring Across Generations. And she is one of Time's 100 most influential people in the world, in the whole world. Completely amazing. And she's the author of The Age of Dignity, Preparing for the Elder Boom in a Changing America. And if you don't know her incredible work already, which I can't imagine you don't, but if you don't, you might recognize Ai-jen from the red carpet of the Golden Globes. So. And then joining her and me is Larry Katz, and Larry is the Elisabeth Allison Professor of Economics at Harvard University. He's also a research associate at the National Bureau of Economic Research. He's co-author of The Race Between Education and Technology, a principal investigator of the long-term evaluation of the Moving to Opportunity program, editor of the Quarterly Journal of Economics, and co-scientific director of JPAL North America. So I don't know how either of these people sleep. I don't think they do. But if we're lucky, I'm hoping that somewhere in this presentation, Larry is going to answer the meaning behind my favorite quote from him. And the quote is that robots don't yet do empathy. So I'm hoping that's going to come up somewhere in our conversation today. So I'm just going to say a couple more things before I turn it over to Larry. And just to put sort of the conversation today in the context of the partnership's work, I wanted to just sort of share 2 big insights from our work to frame things up. And as I said before, the partnership was given the challenge to think creatively and answer the question, what would it take to dramatically increase mobility from poverty? And we had a lot of deliberation about what success would look like, and what do we mean by mobility. And so what you see on your screen is the definition we've developed, and we really feel that there are 3 important principles. The first is economic success, which is the kinds of things many of us are used to measuring. This goes to income, to assets, to wage gains. These things are fundamental, but they're not enough. And we have two other very important principles behind our definition. The second piece is about power and autonomy, which really speaks to having a sense of agency over your life, as well as a say in the trajectory of what happens in your community. And then the third piece is about being valued in community. Some people talk about this as belonging in community, belonging versus othering. It really embodies principles of dignity and respect, which I think will come up in the conversation today. And some people think about this concept as social inclusion. And these principles have been informed by conversations that we've had all around the country, and we've found they've strongly resonated with diverse audiences. And so ideally, all of the ideas and the strategies that the partnership is putting forward would embody all three of these principles, and we would begin to measure outcomes across all three principles. And then just the second thing I want to share is, what are the overall strategies? And so we have a framework that we've put forward. Some of you have seen our paper, Restoring the American Dream. And our view is that dramatically increasing mobility from poverty will require investment in 5 mutually reinforcing strategies: narrative, jobs, place, people, and data. And it will require cross-sector collaboration. No one government agency, philanthropy, or organization can do it alone, but working together, we believe we can dramatically increase mobility from poverty and help to restore the American dream. So the idea that we're going to be talking about today falls into our strategy around creating access to good jobs. So that's the yellow pie piece you see, the first yellow pie piece you see there on your screen. So with that, I'm going to turn the microphone over to Larry to talk to us about some of the trends that have shaped our business area.
Okay, thank you very much. I'm delighted to join. And if we could take a look at the first slide that we put up here. This was put together by a team led by one of our partners, Raj Chetty of Stanford University. And what it does is it uses historical administrative tax data to look at what fraction of American children end up having upward mobility relative to their parents. One sort of definition of the American dream is that everyone has a chance to do at least as well as their parents, and that we make progress. And what it shows is that over much of the 20th century, the vast majority of American children, if you looked at them as adults, say at age 30, earned more than their parents, had more resources, were in jobs that had higher status in many cases. And that was over 90% for people born in the 1940s and 50s. But if you fast forward to the present, a current 30-year-old is only about 50% chance of doing better than their parents economically at the same age, and a large fraction are not thriving as much. And a way to think of that is think about the economy as a big apartment building. And what's basically happened, if you think of the quality of each unit as how you're doing economically, is there's always been a penthouse and some middle units that weren't as nice but were getting better, and some bottom units. Today, what's happened, this is largely driven by inequality and stagnating wages for typical person, is the penthouse has gotten really, really great. Some people from the bottom may move up, some from the middle. That hasn't changed very much, but largely people who were born near the penthouse stay there. That's become incredible. The middle used to grow really rapidly from generation to generation, but it's not changing very much. And unfortunately, the bottom units have been flooded and have got cockroach infestation in the extreme case and aren't showing progress. And people born near the bottom, many of them escape, but they're much more likely to end up there. So the consequence of where you're born has become more important in the U.S., and the likelihood of having progress and it has declined in ways that motivated this partnership. And for most people, the gains that have allowed them to improve on their parents and improve over lives have been through the labor market, through getting good jobs that allowed training, that with representation, often by a union, and with wages that improved over time. So if we turn to the next slide, what we can see is what we think are the driving forces here between this slowdown and upward mobility. The first is that, real wage growth has been stagnant for most Americans. The typical worker has seen no real wage growth on average for decades. The two driving forces behind that are what we call the polarization of the labor market, or the race between education and technology that Claudia Golden and myself have called it. That is, there's been a real shift in the demand through automation, through computerization, through globalization that is reduced demand for what were traditional middle-class jobs, whether that's clerical work, whether those were good production jobs in manufacturing replaced by automation, or whether those were middle management jobs, and an increase in the number of really terrific jobs, but requiring often advanced degrees. Think of data scientist, investment banker, or talent agent, or the talent, and a growth of in-person services, many which, are really jobs that require a lot of people but haven't been that lucrative, often for women and for minorities. Think about home health aides, daycare workers, a wide janitorial services. And so we've seen this bifurcation in the labor market. What's really become rewarded is a combination of strong analytical skills and soft skills, and many of the traditional manual skills are not as rewarded as much in the labor market. On top of this, the institutions and structures that used to provide upward mobility through getting a good job and a firm that was doing well and sticking to it have sort of declined through what we call the fissuring of the labor market. That's number 3 there, which involves both the rise of alternative work arrangements, people who are increasingly used to be a janitor directly employed, used to be an accountant directly employed for a big employer, are often now working for temporary help agencies or working as freelancers, 1099 workers, and a decline of bargaining power through the decline of unions, and a growing segregation of who works with whom. Increasingly, elite workers work directly for institutions, whether it's Harvard University or an investment bank or Apple, and not the way that large firms that used to be a General Motors or a Kodak or a local bank used to employ directly a wide range of workers. And those large employers now have greater market power and face a lot of competitive contractors and are able to take more of the rents when they're doing well. Finally, this has led to a slowdown in the growth of work opportunities, and for men, an actual decline in employment, and for women, after rapid growth for many decades, it's fallen. And I just want to do a few charts to illustrate these trends, and then Ai-jen will talk about the solutions to these issues. So if we go to the next slide, what you can see is this education divide. Only those with a BA or more, this is real wages over the last 4 decades, have had improvements in their earnings, particularly those with advanced degrees. All of those without a college degree have basically had stagnant earnings. And since that's over 60% of the workforce, the median worker has shown no wage gain over the last 4 decades. If we turn to the next slide, what you can see is this focuses on men, is employment. And not only are wages doing poorly, but employment opportunities have declined, and particularly for non-college men, the share working at all, which used to be above 95%, has fallen to about in the low 80s. So about 15% of men now are not employed at all, often for over the whole year. So there have been declining employment opportunities. And if you put those two together, look at the next slide. This is a striking graph that I actually just finished yesterday, since it goes up to data through the end of 2017. This tells you the share of men 25 to 54, a group that used to always sort of be pretty much in the labor market and have reasonable earnings opportunities. What fraction of them don't work at all, or when they work, don't earn a wage high enough to get out of poverty, which is basically like it's less than $12 an hour when they work. And what's striking is that was about 15% of all men 4 decades ago. Only 6% didn't work. Today, that's almost 30%. And in the Great Recession, that increased to 35%. So about a third of all prime age men in the U.S. either don't work at all, or when they work, don't earn a wage enough to get a family out of poverty, which we're talking about only about $12 an hour. In fact, many more that's working full-time, full year, even if they have slightly higher wages, can't do it because they don't have full year work. So this is a really striking change. And then if we move to the next slide, I just want to put in, so part of that is this, change in automation and globalization and decline of these middle skill jobs through pure standard labor market supply and demand. But the other factor has been the decline of clout and access to sort of good jobs and stable jobs. And so two big parts of that are this decline in traditional employment relationships, the growth of independent contractors, freelancers, contracted out workers, temporary help agency workers, and this growing segregation not only of where we live in terms of the rich and the poor and the middle class, but who works with whom, not physically. We still have janitors and, health aides and cafeteria workers in the same locations, but increasingly they are not working for the same employer. They're working for contractors. They don't get the same benefits. As inequality goes up, firms have incentives to reduce costs by shifting to the use of contractors and reducing their benefit payments. And we've seen that. And if you go to the next slide, some work that Alan Kruger and I have done documenting this shows that 16% of all American workers were in these alternative work arrangements by 2015, with a particularly big growth in contracted out workers and freelancers, independent contractors. Some of that is good. People are getting more flexibility. They're choosing their own, but some of that are constraints and lack of benefits and more unstable income. And if we turn to the next slide, this growing fissuring of people not sort of working for the higher wage employers has contributed about a third to the growth of inequality, what we call sorting. The fact that high wage employers, think of an investment bank, think of Apple, increasingly just employ college graduates and they contract out all their other services with fewer benefits. So rising education returns are reinforced by this. And finally, if we go to the next slide, to just sum up these patterns over time, what we've seen is this decline for many workers in access to good jobs with good benefits, a decline in their sort of clout in the labor market from unionization, and a decline in the likelihood that not only are that they're going to stick for a long time with a single employer who will provide training and a career path. What we've seen rising is these alternative work arrangements, and we see this both in tax and survey data, the rise of the gig economy, which has some great flexibility and gives you a possibility of multiple jobs, but also a lot more instability and not the same sort of ticket to the middle class that often traditional jobs are. And finally, these shifts have meant that we need to rethink the way people get jobs. And not think that you're going to step out of high school and walk into a stable job. There's going to be a greater need for retraining, thinking about partnerships between community colleges, and employers for training. And we need to worry about the nature of the change in skills with automation and artificial intelligence and the rise of soft skills and the clear sense that jobs, as Misha said, robots do not yet do empathy. They also don't quite do very subtle physical actions that a health aide or a child care worker would need to do or interact with people, as well as many in-person service individuals, whether it's working, in a culinary occupation or whether it's working in a wide, as a physical therapist or a wide range of sort of interactive jobs. So thinking about those teamwork, those skills, how do we upgrade these growing in-person services so we don't have this continuing bifurcation? There's no reason that a child care or health aide job shouldn't be a pathway to a professional high-earning job. And, there's no reason in a rich society with rapid productivity that we shouldn't have more broadly shared prosperity. And so I'll turn it over to Aijen to solve all these problems.
Thank you, Larry. Well, thanks to everyone for joining the call. And it's just really been an honor for me to be a part of the partnership, to work with Larry and Nisha and the others to really try to think big and imagine solutions that can solve for some of these really complex problems that we're faced with. And I've just learned a tremendous amount from working with Larry on this. So thank you, Larry. So the way that I come to this work is through having spent the last 2 decades working to create economic security and mobility for the growing workforce that works in our homes. As nannies, caring for our children, as home care workers and home attendants, supporting our aging loved ones and people with disabilities to live independently, as house cleaners, helping to maintain sanity and order in our homes. 20 years ago, this workforce and the conditions facing this workforce actually seemed quite marginal. It was really important work. We always called it the work that makes all other work possible because it supports so many of us to go out into the work and do the work that we do in the world every day. And it was always undervalued and quite vulnerable. And the conditions that face this workforce were really at the time seen as very marginal and existing really in the shadows of our economy. Conditions like lack of a contract or lack of a clear job description, no control over your hours, or even a regular schedule that you could look forward to, lack of time off, lack of training and workforce preparation, lack of access to benefits or a safety net, and ultimately extremely low wages. These are some of the conditions that domestic workers and home care workers are quite familiar with and have always really defined this work. And as Larry just laid out, they have suddenly, maybe not so suddenly, come to define more and more of the American workforce's experience. My colleague Pollock Shaw often describes our workforce as the original gig economy workers for this reason. These conditions have created the imprint in which a growing number of workers who work in alternative arrangements now work. And so we're also finding that many of the sectors where we can predict we will see growth, as Larry discussed, are sectors like in-person service work, like care work and domestic work. And in fact, the fastest growing occupation in the entire economy is home care. So this is a topic that we've been very interested in, and we brought the lessons learned from our sector into the work of the partnership. And what we were able to do is actually convene over the course of the last 2 years, leaders in the field overall to really look at what are some of the lessons of the field in general in seeking to turn poverty wage jobs into real pathways to economic mobility. And what we've been able to do is identify some really exciting work in the field and some solutions, some of which are ready to go and in motion, and some of which are in development. And so we're just going to try to lay out some of those solutions and strategies. And as Larry so well described, the problem and challenges are quite complex. They're structural and dynamic. Our goal was to try to identify which ideas out there could actually take this body of work to create good jobs in the future to the next level, right? So the strategies that we landed on include, one, really looking at how we support more access to good work that actually pays well. So, and that includes everything from state and local policy initiatives to raise wages, improve scheduling practices and paid leave initiatives, to efforts that are really broadly supported to enhance and expand the federal earned income tax credit. There's a lot of support across all segments of our policy landscape and leadership to actually look at how we strengthen the earned income tax credit. And Larry's done some really good research on how impactful that could be. And then employer codes of conduct. There are some really strong models for initiatives and leadership that employers have already taken to support good jobs in their companies. The next strategy that we looked at, where there's a lot of energy, is the idea of creating portable benefits for workers and alternative employment arrangements. Larry talked a lot about the rise of alternative employment arrangements, and over the course of the last 15 years, organizations like the Freelancers Union and others have been experimenting with the idea of offering so-called non-traditional workers access to benefits that follow them from job to job. And we think that there's a lot of potential here, and there are pilots and initiatives in motion to both create portable benefits policies at the local, the municipal and state level, and as well to develop products. For example, a portable benefits product that we're developing at the National Domestic Workers Alliance for independent house cleaners with multiple employers. So there are policies and products that are in development that can expand the access to benefits for non-traditional alternative employment-based workers. Next, we looked a lot at, in the field, this idea that the challenges are so great. We are obviously going to need collaboration and creative partnerships between philanthropy, the private sector, and government to really support the creation of good jobs. And a big piece that felt like was missing to a lot of people in the field is the role of workers in that partnership. That it really does feel like we need to strengthen the ability of workers to have a voice and a role in shaping their future and shaping the future of work overall. That on some level, the kind of extreme inequality that we're looking at and the barriers to economic mobility require that workers are at the table in a different way with government and philanthropy and the private sector as we design for a future with more access to good work. So this question of how we support workers to be at the table in meaningful ways, whether it's creative partnerships with employers or really looking at the kind of conversations that put workers in solution design mode with government, philanthropy, and the private sector. Fourth, there's a whole body of work and lots of support for imagining how we leverage the public sector in terms of supporting wage subsidies and job guarantees for workers, particularly at the bottom of the economy. And so this is an area of work that Larry and his colleagues have also done a lot of research on, and is something that it seems like there's also very broad support for. Fifth, we looked at what it could mean, given the complexity of the issues in different sectors, to actually go deep in sectors where we know there is going to be growth. So we know, because of the growing aging population and the aging of the baby boomer generation, that there is going to be an increase in the need for care, and especially home-based care, that these jobs are going to continue to exist and grow. And if we actually looked at a holistic or multifaceted approach to making these jobs good jobs that you could take pride in and support your family on, and one generation could do better than the next, that we could actually make major headway for millions of workers in the economy. So a sector approach that includes a holistic set of strategies like strengthening training and career pathways and establishing new apprenticeship models, and partnerships with private sector health systems, and partnerships with technology companies to create good jobs. So I think that there's a huge opportunity to look sector by sector in some of these sectors where we can anticipate there will be growth to actually make a huge difference in the lives of millions of workers. And finally, this question of training and education, which has been a topic for many years, and we agree that education is critical, and we really think that we need to be looking at how we update and upgrade how we think about workforce education and preparation for the 21st century. That we really do need to be thinking about how we're building human capital over a lifetime, creating access to ongoing training and education and retraining through the course of our lives in skills that are transferable and can be utilized in multiple contexts. And that includes technology and preparing people for a rapidly changing technology environment, but it also includes some of the human-centered skills that are now more and more important across the economy as well. So those are some of the strategies that we looked at and that we heard from the field around, and where we felt like there was the most energy and potential to really dive in and take this whole body of work to the next level.
Great. Thank you, Aijin and Larry. That was, I feel like, 2 semesters worth of knowledge if this were a university course in about 20 minutes or so. So that's, I told you they were amazing, and they are. So we now want to open it up and give our audience a chance to ask questions. And I'll just remind everyone here again. Oh, and I should have said this at the beginning. This is being recorded. And so it'll be available later if you have colleagues that weren't able to join in today live. Both the slides and the recording will be sent out after the webcast. And so to ask questions, you can type them in the chat box that you see on your screen, questions or comments, and please be sure to include your name and organization if you can, because we'd love to recognize you. And if you have questions later, you can send them to the email address on your screen at events@urban.org, and keep using that hashtag. I know some of you are already using it. So we've already got some questions that have come in, so I'm going to start with a few of those. And one is, this has come up a lot in our conversation. So we've mentioned a lot of solutions. One thing that hasn't come up in the presentation today is something that's kind of a hot topic in this future of workspace, which is UBI, or a universal basic income. And people wanting to know thoughts from our presenters about that topic and how might it relate to some of the other proposals that you did talk about today. I'll actually open up that both to Larry and Aijin, because I know it's something you've both thought a lot about.
Okay, so yes, we have thought a lot about UBI, and the way I would think about it is that I'm not convinced that the way to think about UBI is all the jobs are going away. I think jobs are changing, and the key is I think we need to have a very strong safety net, something like a UBI, of which, effectively in the U.S. right now only SNAP, which is also under threat, plays that role, food stamps, but something that forms a basis to make sure everyone has some stability. But I think, politically and practically, we have a lot of evidence that things that link to work end up being, much more beneficial in the long run, allowing people to take some of that money to connect up to a job, things like a job guarantee, an enhanced earned income tax credit. With that, we came to view is likely to be more politically palatable in the U.S. and a better use of our resources, ones that will both spur skills and opportunities, as well as provide that. So I would think of it as sort of I would think of a system with a very generous earned income tax credit, with guarantees to jobs to people who try to find work and are unable to get them, to provide that. But clearly for people unable to work, a strong universal basic income targeted at that would be very important. I think the things of linking stuff to the dignity of work, I think, was viewed as very important by the partnership.
Aijin, do you want to?
Yes, I really believe that a universal basic income is really complementary to all of the solutions that we've laid out here. And what I appreciate about it is that I think that what we have in it at the moment is a really brutal economy where there's very little resilience and buffer for a majority of working people in this country. And I think that what we're trying to figure out is how do we update and bring into the 21st century our safety net and our policy framework to really reflect the reality of the vast majority of the working population in this country. And I think a universal basic income supports resilience in this very rough economy, and it doesn't replace, I think it supplements a lot of the solutions that we've discussed here about how do we support good work in the future, access to good work. And I'll just say that I think the level of conversation that universal basic income and its champions have really created has been really important, because it's really awakened a lot of us to the scope and scale of both the challenges and the kinds of solutions we need to be talking about. We need to be thinking very big about how we reimagine and reinvent our safety net and our policy frameworks. I know there are going to be some people who are working on how to reimagine our worker classification frameworks, right? Our W-2 versus independent contractor as the two employment categories. This is something we talked a lot about in this working group, because it felt like those two categories were limited and not fully capturing of the reality of the American workforce. And what we were seeing is a growing number of people actually falling through the cracks of getting access to the kind of benefits and security that everyone in the economy actually deserves. And so there's a lot that needs to be thought through, and having conversations about big ideas like universal basic income, like worker classification, is really what we need to be doing at this point. And it's an opportunity to do that. And like I said, I think the concept of it is very complementary to a lot of the solutions that we laid out here.
Great, thanks, Ai-jen. So here, a few questions that have come in that sort of, I think, dovetail nicely with this conversation and the point that you just made about worker classification. So one question is, given that changes to federal regulations that govern what we refer to as 1099 workers is probably a long-term project, what are some strategies for advancing protections currently for contract, temporary, or gig economy workers in the near term? And that could be for either Larry or Ai-jen.
Larry, do you want to talk about enhancing the earned income tax credit piece?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's the earned income tax credit has the nice advantage that it's not, it's available to 1099 and to W-2 workers, so it's a way of supplementing the incomes. And we have been running some experiments for groups that have been left behind, particularly things like non-custodial parents who don't get very much out of it, or individuals recently leaving the criminal justice system. And we found, working with MDRC, some very positive effects on net income, improvement of child support payments, and sort of a way to get reconnected to the labor market with some insurance. So I think that's an example of a universal benefit, but things we need to think about creating some sort of fund where the types of things 1099 workers don't get, like workers' compensation, unemployment insurance, a more universal benefit. And then we need to think about the rights to be able to sort of bargain and have voice, whether it's a contract employee or a 1099. But I think expanded EITC, some test of portable benefits, and thinking more broadly, about that, there ought to be universal sort of rights of workers to have voice, not connected to some historical classification system, are, going to be tough fights. But I think there are potential models out there that would both allow the choice of whether to be an independent or a traditional employee to be based on the economic merits and not about employers trying to get around regulatory systems that have created that were really designed for the 1930s and not for today.
So I have a bunch of follow-up questions on portable benefits. Iden, do you want to say anything else on that, or should we go to those?
Let's go to the portable benefits question.
Okay, so there's a whole bunch. So I'm going to try to cluster these. There's sort of 3 different questions here, and then maybe you can both comment. So first we have Camille Moore, who's a fellow at the National League of Cities, who's saying, I'm wondering which benefits could be most effective in supporting 1099 workers. How can we combine healthcare, unemployment insurance, and retirement and make them truly portable? So that's one question. A related question from Caitlin Schnurr at the Heartland Alliance is asking, can you explain how portable benefits are different from universal benefits approaches? For example, would portable healthcare be different than just having universal healthcare? And then maybe this is a way to pull in a specific example. So this is, I hope I'm pronouncing your name correctly. Eli Anzalati from Fast Company is asking, I'm wondering if iGen could talk more about the specific product to support portable benefits for at-home workers. And I think, iGen, that's actually something that you all have at NDWA have developed. So maybe you could sort of start out talking about what some of the benefits are, how to make them portable, how that's different from universal, and then maybe you could talk a little bit about the work that you've already done with your product.
Great. Well, I will start with that, and I'll let Larry address the broader questions. And so the model that we're developing is basically trying to create a way for multiple household employers of people who hire residential house cleaners to clean their homes maybe once a week or once every other week, to contribute a small fee on top of the cleaning fee, so maybe $5 on top of the cleaning fee, to a benefits fund for the house cleaner. And so that house cleaner can accrue those contributions from multiple employers. And then she has this fund that goes along with her, and she can ask more and more of the people who hire her to clean their homes to contribute. And then over time, she gets to choose from a suite of benefits to apply the money in the account towards. And it could be everything from paid time off, which is very difficult for independent contractors like house cleaners to actually come by, to things like life insurance or an accident insurance. And we're actually in the process of testing different products and seeing what people need and what people want and what works financially. So we're actually in the process of just of testing the product, and we'll have much more to be able to reveal publicly in the summer.
Okay, so there was a question about portable benefits versus universal benefits. And, I think the way I would think about the difference, and this is sort of definitional, is in a portable benefit system, you're sort of taking as given that there already is an existing set of benefits that are employer provided for people in traditional work arrangements, and we're not trying to blow that up or change that as a starting point. And we're trying to give something like that to people who don't have, long-term traditional employment relationships, as the way Ijan said, potentially for, by every amount of revenue you're getting as a freelancer or a contract worker 1099, some amount gets paid into a fund that you can take to draw on as best possible when you don't have the traditional employer relationships. But if an employer was providing you with health insurance and you're in workers' comp separately in UI, it wouldn't be paid into the portable benefits during that period. It would be paid in the periods when you aren't getting the other set of benefits. A universal benefit system would essentially be replacing the existing employer health insurance and unemployment insurance and others, payroll taxes with, one system that was uniform. If we were starting the world from the beginning, that might make sense, and then employers could supplement it with additional things. But given we already have this well-functioning for many employees, employer system, the portable one is trying to do that for everyone else. It could be, if the economy continues to evolve in a way that very few workers have the traditional one, that a universal system would replace it. But the portable is sort of the filler in for those periods when you're not getting the traditional employment relationships, and that's the way I would think about the difference.
Great. We have some more. Portable benefits seems to be quite the hot topic. So here's a follow-up question for you both, and this is from Catherine Eister at the National Partnership for Women and Families. She'd love to hear thoughts or strategies for getting unions on board with portable benefits, or how to make portable benefits work for them. Or she says, I guess specifically the phrasing would be, how to strengthen the role of unions while supporting a future with portable benefits. So I think either Ijen or Larry, thoughts on that?
So, I think the truth is that unions should be very much in favor of, portable benefits to the extent that they also, both as benefits to workers, and they may be the right sort of unit, workers' organizations or unions, to help manage and envision them, as in the way, historically, with, unions where workers go through a lot of employers, whether it's in construction, whether it's in the, entertainment industry, often benefits have been portable. The origins of unions in the United States often were ones providing portable benefits, whether it was life insurance, in the worst case, burial and funeral insurance, and early health insurance before employers provided it. So in some sense, the gig economy and growth of independent workers is moving back to historically the things you might have thought of as the artisanal economy and unions' original role, when they didn't actually have the legal rights to collective bargaining, were often self-help organizations that work to create pools of workers to create these benefits. So we think that's a natural role. And if you think about Scandinavian countries that have universal benefits, for example, in Denmark and Sweden, unions manage the unemployment insurance system, which has many of these elements. So we think it's, having a well-functioning worker organization in an economy evolving this way is quite essential to getting these sorts of benefits to work well. And it's a clear, role that unions should have, which they've historically had in where they've been in workplace environments that aren't the traditional long-term job with a single employer.
And I'll just build on that point. I was just going to build on that point by saying, whether it's in the union context or whether it's in an independent worker association like ours at the National Domestic Workers Alliance, providing benefits and services has always been a core part of the work that we do. And it is really important because we have just such a focus on and a grounding in what the needs and concerns of the workforce are, and are often able to really continue to innovate based off of direct feedback from workers about how these programs are working for them, how to strengthen them, and so on. So I think it's the right role for worker organizations to provide these benefits and to really help imagining how to bring these benefits into the future.
Right. And just one line to reinforce the classic model of unions and worker organizations, thought of by people like Richard Freeman and Jim Medoff here at Harvard, was that unions, and worker organizations don't just have a clout and bargaining role, but they also have a voice role of aggregating up the preferences in ways that are often very difficult for employers to do because of the trust and fear of exploitation issues, whereas a worker organization can be, quite an important role in making sure that what workers actually need are the types of benefits you get.
Okay, that was great, both of you, because it's almost like you anticipated some of the questions, because you've just answered a couple of other questions that came in around the role of unions and sort of alternative kinds of organizations. So I'm going to go to a different topic, a different question, which is from Brian Weinberger, who's asking if you could expand on the idea of employer codes of conduct. What would those entail in a labor market in which workers have decreasing leverage and market power?
I think Larry's example of the Harvard employer code of conduct is really good. Yeah.
Right. So, an example, of an employer code of conduct came in the case of Harvard. So Harvard traditionally, employed people in-house, had, a number of unions for things like cafeteria, dining hall workers, for janitorial, custodial work, for security guards. And in the sort of 80s and 90s, a lot of that eroded with outsourcing, sometimes to non-union, sometimes same union competing, and one saw declining wages and benefits. And at that point, Harvard was faced by union and student action. So this was, taking over Massachusetts Hall, and we formed a sort of group between workers, unions, students, faculty, administrators to think about it. We came up with sort of a code of conduct, which we call the wage and benefits parity policy, that essentially said you can contract out these freelancers, contractors to gain sort of efficiency, but not to undercut your labor standards. You have to pay the same wages and benefits externally as internally, and that both, meant that you would only be contracting out for good efficiency reasons, and it would take off some of that pressure. And in the period since, the last, 15 years, we now see, food service, workers at Harvard making, $24, $25 an hour versus $14, $15 in Harvard Square, yet the prices, we have the same contractors doing it, are exactly the same because of improvements in worker productivity and the services they provide, similar things for our janitorial workers. So in principle, large employers who historically did this for their own workers commit to do the same thing for their contractors, and we believe philanthropy and groups of employers coming together could make this a feasible strategy. Clearly, individual employers would really worry about losing the competitive advantage, but if multiple firms in a sector all were willing and philanthropy to sign on to a code of conduct, it could be, a good way of ensuring stability of a workforce, even of contracting out and doing these for the right reasons. We're under no illusions that this would be easy, but certainly, a number of major tech companies have started taking steps in this direction, and it's going to require a lot of pressure from, shareholder activists and from worker groups to keep this on the table. But, it's a way of trying to reassure that high-performing employers, make sure that all the people who do that work get to share in it, not just an elite group who are directly employed by the employer.
So we have another question I think actually dovetails nicely on what Larry was just speaking about, and this is from, and it's a great question to ask Jen as well, from Colette Hanna with the LA County Economic Development Corporation, who joined us on our last webinar. Thanks for coming back. So on the last webinar, she says you discussed changing the narrative about poverty. With regard to employers, how can we, or what initiatives are underway to bring the private sector, and for example, large corporations, into the conversation and understanding and changing the narrative in how they provide benefits or better wages to employees or employees of contracted service providers?
Great. Well, I think that there is, there are a lot of efforts to change culture within the private sector to pay more attention to workers and the need to create good jobs in the future. And, there's everything from companies who've signed up to be a part of the B Corp movement, and B Labs has played a really important role in that, to organizations like Transform Finance, who've been trying to help people understand make the business case for doing right by workers. And there's been a lot of research to show that there is a very strong business case. There's a professor named Zainab Tom, who is a part of one of our roundtables, who's done a lot of great research on companies like Costco. And there is a real case to be made that it is in the interest of business to really think about the supply side and offer sustainable jobs for the future. I know my organization has thought a lot about how to shape tech as a growing part of our economy and to really lift up leaders in the tech economy who are really paying attention to this issue and wanting to be a part of the solution and wanting their platforms to be positive for the people working in them or working on them. And one of the things we led was something called the Good Work Code, which is a set of principles that define good work in the tech economy, in the online economy, that are based off of lots of interviews we did with gig economy workers about some of their concerns and challenges at working on those platforms. And we launched the Good Work Code over a year ago with 12 companies in the tech economy and have been really starting a conversation there along with many others who are trying to talk about how tech can be a part of the solution, both at the level of policy, and there are many champions of ideas like portable benefits and universal basic income, but also in terms of their company practices. And a couple of examples of experiments that we've tried are working with a company called Care.com around promoting something we call the Fair Care Pledge within their marketplace. And the Fair Care Pledge is basically a pledge that people who hire caregivers on the Care.com marketplace can take to pay a living wage, offer paid time off, and have a clear work agreement with their caregivers. So simple 3 principles that we think are the foundation for fairness in the employment relationship. And in the course of a year, almost 300,000 families took the pledge. And so these kinds of efforts that try to offer opportunities to change norms and change culture are really about driving a narrative that is trying to create a pull in the economy to say we all have a moral responsibility and increasingly a very practical and economic responsibility and opportunity here to work together to create good jobs in the future. And so we want to increasingly look for leaders who are doing that and add oxygen to those efforts and really encourage and support workers who are at the table really trying to shape some of those narrative change strategies as well. So I love there's more and more examples of workers and employers coming together to change norms and change narrative using tools like that that I think we should really be supporting.
Okay, we're almost at the hour, so we have time probably for just one more question, and I'm going to pop up on the screen our website and our Twitter handles in case you had questions that we didn't get to. We invite you to continue the conversation. But I think I want to close with this one because it's a question for both of you. And the comment here is that I love this collaboration between a labor economist and an organizer, kind of unusual. And so what did you learn from each other, and how did that shape the ideas that you developed, and how might it shape the work going forward? All in 2 minutes.
Sure. I learned, an amazing amount from Ai-jen, on things ranging, just understanding, the care sector, many of these innovations going on that she and her organization have done, the incredible value of listening to workers themselves, and just the, incredible energy, around these conversations, and just the creativity from getting involved and, every day thinking about the lives of individuals in the workforce and not sort of coming from it just from the point of view of looking at, spreadsheets and computer output, but, the real voices that provide context, and her amazing ability to link that with the more analytical stuff we do was just, incredibly inspirational for me. And every aspect of what we did and the partnership, from the future of work to the broader narrative stuff, was shaped by her experiences and ideas. So I gained a tremendous amount that I don't normally get at academic conferences.
And
yeah, I was just going to say that I think that Larry and the other economists in the circle gave me such a profound appreciation for the amount that organizers and other people who are working on the ground really need to know and equip ourselves with as tools and analytic frameworks and data to more effectively serve the populations that we care about and the people, the lives that we're responsible for. There's so much in the form of wisdom and analysis and data that people like Larry are creating, insight that people like Larry are creating that really should define our future. And the connection between that insight and analysis and the actual power of people in motion who are coming together to try to change and shape the future of work is exactly what's going to get us to where we need to go. Larry's work is absolutely indispensable to people like me and to our movements in terms of getting to the right solutions and being able to measure our impact and understand what's working and what isn't. And I do hope that that we're able to seed and inspire more of this kind of collaboration between economists and academics and activists and organizers and people who are working at the community level, because it really is uniquely powerful to put the two together.
Now, and let me just close by saying it's been my honor and privilege to get to work with both of you and all the partnership members. And if folks listening in were excited by this conversation, wait, there's more. So a note on what's next. We'll release papers that are part of our strategies over the next several weeks. And if you'd like to get those directly in your inbox, you can always go to our website, which is on your screen. But if you want them delivered directly to your inbox, you can sign up for our newsletter, which is called the Partnership Post. And if you go to our website, it's actually the sign up field is at the top center of your screen. And we've got some more webinars coming up. Two on ideas within our strategy that we sort of describe as our aspiration, which is to ensure that zip code is not destiny. So in a couple of weeks on Thursday, March 1st, also at noon Eastern, we'll discuss opportunity neighborhoods, building the foundation for economic mobility in America's metros. And then a couple of weeks later on Thursday, March 15th, also at noon Eastern, we'll discuss opening mobility pathways by closing the financial services gap. So I know we had some questions on fintech we didn't have time to get to. That'll be a great webinar to dial into if you want to get more into that topic. And again, you can register for both at mobilitypartnership.org. Thank you again, Larry and iGen, and thank you everyone for joining us. That concludes our webinar.